And we'll welcome to the microphone our Secretary of State, Scott Schwab. Secretary?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to say I enjoyed my time in the Senate, but I've never been here. So I was across the way. As you guys went through another redistricting, I'm like, this was my third redistricting I've been in politics through. So it's good luck on trying to learn the new voters. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. That being said, thanks for Mr. Chairman and members of the committee for letting us in today. And again, we want to thank you for passing the bill we passed out last year. Many folks, after we won a contentious general election, we really felt like we had the goodwill in this body to do some cleanup that we've been trying to do for years. And in that bill, I know you guys, you adjourn, you go home, and after 30 days, a hard drive, you delete those files because they're replaced with new files as you come back. But in that bill, it was simple things like, during 1860s, during the Civil War, Missouri would come into Kansas and kidnap our poll workers so we couldn't have an election because they didn't want anti-slavery Republicans elected to the Congress. So you passed a bill that said, well, what the legislature passed a bill that said you can elect your own poll workers then if that happens. We're not really worried about that so much anymore, so thank you for getting rid of that. I know we still have cannons pointed across the river at Fort Leavenworth at Missouri. But we're still not really that concerned about stealing poll workers anymore. But we've done a lot in elections over the past decade and a half, starting with voter ID and the SAFE Act. And I'm going to keep these on. I keep on. My wife says either leave the glasses on or take them off, but decide. I can't do it. But in 2011, we did voter ID, which was a bipartisan effort. In 2019, we did post-election audits to verify that the counts were in fact the counts. And then in 2022, we expanded some of those, which was really good because we had the close election audit. So if there's an election that's within less than 1%, we expand that audit. And little did we know we had a statewide primary race that ended up being won by less than 1%, and y'all passed that in the perfect time. So this year, for the first time we're going to have in years, we're going to have 3 elections. We have the presidential preference primary you all passed, and that's going to be March 19th, and that'll be after Super Tuesday. The reason why it's called a preference primary is because normally when we do primaries in August, whoever wins the primary is on the ballot in November. The parties still decide how much they weight this election that you passed. So as they draft their rules, it may be 30% of the delegates, it could be 100% of the delegates. And by time our election comes, it'll be March 19th. Super Tuesday will have passed. We may elect somebody who's no longer in the race anymore. So it's the state's preference. That's why it's not a for sure primary. So we're looking forward to see how that participation rate is in March. I appreciate you helping the counties out by asking them to do something they typically wouldn't do by funding it for them. And so things like that. You guys, you did good work on that. And I appreciate the body working with our office. Sometimes there's amendments on the floor. We have a situation now of a member who's not even in the Senate anymore that said, if you look like the Secretary of State, nobody wants to look like this. But if you're going to imitate the Secretary of State, it's a crime. We got sued. Well, the appellate court changed it to a strict scrutiny standard. So sometimes it's not the lawsuit and the issue. It's the other issue of can we change the way we look at laws when the legislature passes election law. If the Kansas Supreme Court agrees with that standard, we're losing voter ID. We may lose signature verification on advanced mail ballots. There may be an increased cost to the counties because there then could be a lawsuit that says the stamp on the envelope is a burden on the voter. So now the counties have to pay for all postage on return mail ballots. So this is a can of worms that's very extreme. So again, we're just going to continue to ask you, if you have ideas on elections, please work with us so they don't become litigated across the street or in federal court. And then if we lose, you have to pay for it. You have to pay the judgment. So it can be really tricky. And you've all worked with Clay and Whitney this year. Brian has forgotten more about elections than most people know. And Clay, I still, even though I'm in the same office as the Attorney General, I still say I have the most intelligent attorney in that building because he's so savvy and he's such a quick study. So if you have these ideas, please work with our office. We're more than happy to get you to the goal of what you're trying to accomplish without increasing litigation. Thank you again for voting for a bill last year. This year's bill, we're asking you not to vote for it because we don't have one. We do not like drastic change in major presidential election years. It can cause absolute chaos. So if you do have an idea, it's best when you do it in those local elections like we just had last year, because typically there's less volume. And so therefore, if there is an error, we have more capacity at the county level to correct the administrative errors. The other thing I'd like to remind the committee that, yes, sometimes there's administrative errors, but errors don't equal fraud. Sometimes people think those terms are synonymous. Just because someone didn't sign a form that they weren't even legally obligated to doesn't mean there's some type of hijinks going on. And I think we pretty well proved after the recount on the value of them both, and none of the counties flipped, that in fact y'all have made good policy to make sure our elections are secured. And so that's why I don't think we need the change. Now, I've always said, we look at election security like we look at cybersecurity. Just because your server's safe today doesn't mean it's going to be safe tomorrow. So we as secretaries of state nationally, we meet twice a year. We also work with CISA to look at domestic threats and potential foreign threats, and also just some folks who just think they can get around and try to cheat in one way or another. And then if it becomes a concern, we all collaborate on best practices to solve that. Just like you do with NCL, CSG, and ALEC. You have your model legislation. We try to come up with such things as well. So we do have some legislation we're proposing, but it's more on the business side on some technical cleanup. You probably heard either on the campaign trail or even before this committee that we were working to get off our server. We will be 90% off that server coming up January 22nd, and we'll be launching our new business services website and portal, which it'll be exciting. We've been working on that for 5 years. I like to tell a story. I was having lunch with Jack Breyer, former Secretary of State, and Ron Thornburg, former Secretary of State. Kansas was the first state to use computers to show tabulation of preliminary results. If you remember way back in the day, way back before your day, the county, when they got results, they'd write it on a chalkboard for each precinct and tally it up. They'd call it into Topeka. They'd write it on a board in the rotunda on the first floor here in the Capitol. And then reporters would write it on a pad, and they would call it in the station or the newspaper to publish results. The Secretary Breyer said, we got this new far-fangled, really cool server. Why don't we just put monitors in the rotunda, and we'll charge the press access to that. We'll sequester the results for 15, or embargo the results for 15 minutes, and then we'll release it after the press does, and they just have to pay to get those results early, and then help fund the agency without having to use SGF. Well, there was an intern in his office by the name of Ron Thornburg who had to run a cable out of the second floor Secretary of State's office, down through the rotunda, down through the tunnel to the second floor of docking, which is no longer there, to transportation, because they had the same server in case the server failed. IBM was so concerned it was not going to work. The CEO of IBM was in the Capitol here in Topeka with a rudimentary cell phone so he can call a programmer at any minute if the system failed. Didn't fail. Good. Here's the bad news. I'm still on that system. But not for elections, but we are on that system for business services, and we will be off that this year. I don't know if I give it to if I have to give it to the Historical Society or if I can just throw it in the ocean or bury it, because that thing has been a lot of trouble for us. Our staff still logs into a C prompt. That's how old that is, and it's green. Not the orange one, it's the green one. So that's mostly what I have. I really appreciate what you've done. Whitney's going to bring over to you. I thought we had them today, but we'll have them tomorrow. It'll be a card similar to this that'll let you know the various deadlines for elections this year. If you need more, or if you want the PDF, feel free to put your office logo on it if you want to manipulate it, and that way don't manipulate the dates, please. But if you want to put your on there so you can hand it out when you're speaking, because we want folks to know when deadlines are, and obviously with the PPP, things are different. So with that being said, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Committee, any questions? Senator Blasey.
I'm sure you know this, but your website currently seems to be having some issues.
Yeah, it is. So what happened was, especially we're updating it, and some of the issues we've been having is we're leaving the vendor and bringing it in internally. Well, that is not just a switch, it's a process, and the vendor software is a cookie cutter. And then our software, they can't just change the shape of the cookie cutter to help our software. By the 22nd, everything will be fine. But yeah, and any of these folks can call the office. They're more than happy to walk it through. Former Senator Karen Brownlee reached out to me last night, and then she reached out to me this morning and said Kate in her office helped her get through the website. So that'll all be taken care of, but it's a vendor issue.
We're still a couple of weeks away.
22nd. I've been waiting for that day for a long time. It is tattooed on the center of my brain. I know it better than my own anniversary.
Any other questions, committee? I just one thing, and we discussed it yesterday, and I know this came up in Johnson County, and that had to do with the election official, Fred Sherman, sending out 418,000 pre-filled out ballots.
Yeah.
Or not ballots, but
applications
for the advance mailing. Could you speak to that for me?
Yeah.
Because I know a lot of people have been asking me that question.
Yeah. So what had happened was the 4 big counties have election commissioners that I hire, and they do report to our office, but they also report to the county. It's a collaboration on the local level. And that's one of the things you put in your bill is when you change the threshold, who all can help be a voice in the room when making that hiring, which is really important because it's not a political hire like most people think it is. It's an administrative appointment. Almost like when you're hiring your secretary or your administrative assistant, that's not a political appointment. It's an administrative role. So the county wanted to do it. And so Fred asked us if we could do it. Brian said, I don't know, let me talk to the secretary, but he was out of town. Jennifer was out of town, and I was out of country. When we got back, they asked, and I said, no, let's not do that because it's going to create consternation, and it's just, we don't need another battlefront. By then, they were already printed, and they, to the tune of almost, how much was it again? $75,000. I didn't want the county to throw away $75,000 worth of work already. So I told the 4 counties, don't do it this year. Johnson County wants to have a conversation as to why, but even though we normally still have a third, their percentage jumped up a little bit because they did that, but there's 2 things I think about that. One, there's been a culture change with mail ballots simply coming out of COVID. Some folks realized how easy and convenient it was, and they never went back to voting in person. And so we've been seeing a very slow trend of increase in voter turnout by mail. The other thing that's really peculiar about it is, oh shoot, what was I gonna say? Oh, yeah, chasing them. Really, I think it's a political portion for the parties. The parties normally send out pre-filled out ones. And you as a candidate, I mean, when I first ran in 2002, we would fill out the application with them in their home, sign it, and then we'd lick it, put our own stamp on it, and mail it because that was a way to help turn out our vote. It brings confusion, and we dealt with this in your community when everybody's sending in these pre-filled out applications, because especially seniors, like, I thought I filled this out again. So then they fill it out again. And sometimes you have 19 applications for one voter. Well, when you put in a layer for the county to do it too, it just increases that confusion. And now the county's part of the problem, not part of the solution. And I just think government shouldn't be paying for a political activity. I think it's the party's job to get folks to fill those out and prepay them. So that's kind of our position. And it is an expense to the county. It really is. And I love what Connie Schmidt said. And by the way, we did do a statewide election security training. Connie Schmidt, former election commissioner out of Johnson County. She is known nationally in speaking and training election workers on how to make sure they're doing their job with integrity. She's training our clerks. She lost her husband a year and a half ago now. And she texted me about 6 weeks after that and said, the one thing I'm not good at is retiring. Please put me to work. And I'm like, great, because I got a project for you. So the clerks have been loving it. It's bringing consistency across, but it also has increased costs to the counties because many counties, their election equipment was in the same room as their papers and pens. And so anybody could walk in. And in the day where people are stealing election equipment to show things on the internet, we have taken our HAVA funds and gave scholarships to the counties to help them increase security for their equipment. $2 million, correct? Yeah, $2 million out to the counties.
Yeah, Senator Holscher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. I do have a question kind of piggybacking in return to mail ballots. Has there been any thought as far as any type of campaign or awareness in regard to the mail ballots? Because what I have found in talking to voters is, when COVID happened and there was kind of the automatic mailing of ballots or the ballot request form.
Applications, yeah.
Yes, the applications. A number of voters I found as I was talking to just assumed that that was going to keep happening. And so I heard some voters say, oh, I didn't even vote because my application never came. Because
Yeah.
I thought that was the new thing.
Yeah, and it went from getting 9 applications, and y'all passed a law that said certain entities cannot mail them pre-filled, so that cut down on it. My feeling is, folks, we constantly do. I will tell you, when there's a governor's race that's, a contest, they're not paying attention to what I say that much. And we're on TV, we're in the paper, we're telling everybody, and all the education we can get. But let's be honest, if it's tax cuts or sports programs and school boards, it's not as sexy as an envelope with a ballot in it. So we do what we can, but I can't make people click and share what we share on the internet.
Senator Fascido.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary. So just for clarification, so Wichita, Cedric County clerks will mail out an application. So when you are saying pre-filled out, so are you talking about the ones, or there are 2 different ones?
No, it's the same ones. And so what happened in Cedric County is years ago, I think it was like 2 or 3 clerks ago, they eliminated polling places and said, but we'll send out pre-filled applications for people to mail. It did not increase the number of people voting by mail. It just made it harder for people in Wichita to vote because there were less polling places. The current election commissioner there has done a great job drastically increasing the number of polling places, especially in minority communities across Sedgwick County. I'm very pleased. I've been frustrated with Sedgwick County saying, quit cutting this office. And so much as I heard one commissioner one time say, you only work once every other year. Which is not true, because they have bond issues and various things like that. And the local elections are the next year, and it's a lot of volume. Wichita is also looking at buying a building for their election office, which will make things more accessible and more secure for their equipment. So they won't be mailing those out, but the offset is you're going to have more polling places for your population, and they've hired more employees in the election office as well, so you'll get quicker response. So I'm really excited about what Sedgwick's going to do this year.
Any other questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Chairman and
Appreciate
committee.
your update on that. Committee, that's it for today. Basically, we will have a bill hearing tomorrow. No committee meeting on Friday, and of course, we're off on Monday.